Joseph Parker versus Solomon Haumono. I've been promising a video on this fight for a little while now. I believe the fight takes place on Thursday. It might be Friday in New Zealand, but Thursday here in our UK time. So I was keen to get some thoughts up. Now, initially, I hadn't seen much of this opponent. So I did what every boxing fan does in such instances, and I clicked on him on BoxTrack. And the initial reading from his BoxTrack wasn't good. Now, I will come on to how he fights in the ring, because I've been able to track a few fights down of his and watch a little bit of him, so I'll come on to that later. But let me give you my initial reaction when I saw the guy on BoxTrack. BoxTrack have him at 74th in the world. They have him as the third best heavyweight in New Zealand, behind Joseph Parker and behind Cali Meehan. He's 40 years old. He's 6'2". And it is apparent that he has not beaten a top 50 heavyweight at any stage in his career. So my initial reaction, as you can imagine, to this fight wasn't good. Just to reiterate, we're talking about a guy in his 40s, a much smaller man than Joseph Parker, who has fought at a much lower level. The only time he has stepped up to top 50 level, and I'm not even sure Kevin Johnson is top 50, but let's be charitable and say Kevin Johnson's top 50. The only time he stepped up to top 50 level, he was knocked unconscious by Kevin Johnson. Now, Kevin Johnson is known as the gatekeeper. He's known as the guy who gives contenders fights. You know, I know in the past he's beaten Alex Leopai, he's beaten this guy Solomon Haumono, obviously. But let's be honest, top 30 fighters beat Kevin Johnson. Derek Chisora beat Kevin Johnson. Christian Hamer beat Kevin Johnson. Yet Kevin Johnson knocked out Solomon Haumono. Earlier on in his career, Haumono was also outpointed by a fighter who at the time was 3-0, and who subsequently has gone on to be beaten elsewhere. My point is, this does not read well. And this doesn't read well particularly for a heavyweight who's just coming off a win over Carlos Takam. After that Parker versus Takam fight, I did a video, and I think it goes down as the third most viewed video I've ever done on the channel. So shout out to everyone who watches from New Zealand. But I did a video where I said, for me, Parker looked good, but there's a few elements he needs to work on. And he needs to have several more fights at the Takam sort of level where he can really refine his trade. Now, for me, this drop in class, and it is a massive drop in class, is vast. This guy is not only worse than Carlos Takam, but he's worse than Cali Meehan. He's worse than Jakob Saglam. He's worse than Bowie Tupu. For me, this guy is a lower level operator, evidenced by the fact the only time he stepped up to top 50 level, he's been knocked out by Kevin Johnson. So I wasn't impressed by the fight. The one thing I will say in his defence is, you know, there'll be people watching this video who understand the New Zealand heavyweight boxing scene more than I do. I do understand that sometimes domestic clashes generate interest, even though one of the fighters may not be relevant on a world level. I'm trying to think. Anthony Joshua fought Michael Sprott, and that fight generated some mild interest here in the UK. Not because people thought Sprott was going to beat Joshua, but because Sprott is like a stalwart of the heavyweight division, you know, been on the scene for years, has had several bigger fights, and I get that sort of situation generates interest. So I assume that is the case here, and in New Zealand this fight means something because Haumono has been on the public mind for a long period of time. Now, looking at Haumono in ring, and I haven't watched him extensively, there'll be people watching this video who've seen a lot more of him than I have. I understand he's an ex-sports player, I think he's an ex-rugby player, and I haven't seen his full career. I haven't sat down and watched hours and hours and hours of him, right? But I'm going to give you my initial impressions. I think the guy looks really poor in ring. Really poor in ring. I saw a few clips from when he was younger in his career, and I could see when he was younger he was a bit lighter, a bit more athletic. He looked like his punches carried a bit more snap. And I can see, as a younger man, potentially him carrying a bit more of a threat. But I watched his most recent fight, and it was woeful stuff. It was woeful stuff. Nowadays, he's 40 years old. He's heavier. The speed, the natural athleticism that was in his game seems to have faded. And let me say, this guy is slow. This guy is slow. And that's not good when you're stepping in against a guy like Joseph Parker, who many consider to be the fastest active heavyweight. He also looks like a guy who's come to boxing late. You watch the way he constructs punches. He's got a little bit of a jab which he pushes out sometimes, but really he's quite a wild puncher. He likes to swing a bit. He's a bit of a guy who's going to throw haymakers in there, which isn't a bad thing, but he's wild. We're looking at a slow, wild, overweight heavyweight, in my opinion, up against a guy like Joseph Parker, who's proven top 10 capability with much more elite boxing skills, much more elite punching power, proven at a much higher level as well. I look at Haumono, and I've got to be honest when I say he poses very little threat to Joseph Parker. Now, I read a few articles in the press about this fight, and there was one New Zealand newspaper who said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not quoting, but said something to the effect of Solomon Haumono believes he hits as hard as George Foreman. Let me say, I don't believe I have ever read such a nonsensical headline since I started this YouTube channel. Solomon Haumono does not hit as hard as George Foreman. He doesn't hit as hard as Joseph Parker. He doesn't hit as hard as Anthony Joshua. He probably doesn't hit as hard as Tyson Fury. If you watch this guy fight, the way to generate power from a punch is a combination of, natural strength and size and speed. And if you watch this guy, the punches are so slow, so looping, so wide. He just doesn't look like a hard puncher to me. The fact that the level of opposition he's been in with has been so low has given him a high KO ratio. But let's put it this way. We saw what Anthony Joshua did to Kevin Johnson. Anthony Joshua destroyed Kevin Johnson. By the end of the first round, it was clear that fight was over. And I believe Joshua got a stoppage in the second round. When Kevin Johnson fought Solomon Haumono, the result went the other way. Kevin Johnson knocked Haumono out. Now, do we really believe that a fighter with George Foreman's power would really have been undressed like that by Kevin Johnson? Do we really believe that a fighter with George Foreman's power would have been outpointed by a 3-0 prospect when that fighter was much more advanced in their career? It's nonsense. I'm sure Haumono was an athlete. I'm sure Haumono, at some point, if managed differently, would have been capable of being in a decent fight. But anyone who watches his last fight, anyone who sits through that last fight against a woeful journeyman opponent, will know that this guy has absolutely nothing to offer at top 20 level, top 30 level, frankly top 50 level. And I would pick a large number of the guys Joseph Parker has already beaten to beat this guy. I'd pick Cali Meehan, I'd pick Jason Petway, I'd pick Jakob Saglam. Certainly there'd probably be more if I actually got into it. For me, Haumono's clearly got a puncher's chance. Despite the fact I don't believe he's got the punching power of Big George. Few do. He's a big guy. He throws haymakers. Clearly It's heavyweight boxing. He's got a puncher's chance. But I believe this would be very, very, very easy work for Joseph Parker. The gap in speed, the gap in athleticism today in 2016, the gap in punching power, the gap in technique should be evident from the first minute of the first round. I'm sure Haumono's a warrior. I'm sure he's got the heart of a lion. But I don't see this fight lasting very long at all. I'd like to think Joseph Parker will get him out of there in 2 or 3 rounds. And really, he needs to be. Because if this guy's causing you any problems at all, you've got very little chance at the top level. Parker's a very good fighter. Parker is a very good fighter. His win over Carlos Takam showed there's still a lot for him to work on. But showed he's definitely top 10 at this stage of his career. And despite the fact that there undeniably is a lot more to work on for Parker, Haumono isn't the type of opponent who's going to bring that out of him. Haumono's been stopped before. It was by Kevin Johnson, who's a much less aggressive heavyweight with much lower output and much less power than Joseph Parker. I expect Parker to go out there. I think he should, as always, I say this every Joseph Parker video I do, he needs to stick with his boxing. Don't want to see him getting sucked into a war. Don't want to see him throwing wild haymakers. Don't want to see him descending to this guy's level. I want to see Parker go out there. I want to see him establish his jab. I want Parker to move around this guy, highlighting the gap in athleticism and speed and levels. And then I want Parker to take him out early. 2 rounds, 3 rounds, 4 rounds. It's that sort of territory I'm looking at. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Have I been harsh on Haumono? Have I missed stuff about him? It's possible I have. I haven't been following his career. Just from the footage I've seen, it's not inspiring stuff. Does anyone give Haumono a chance? Let me know your thoughts, guys. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please do press subscribe. I will be coming back to do a post-fight video after the fight, so I'd love it if you could subscribe so you could check that out. Many thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. Appreciate it.